Good evening, Rolling Meadows. It is December 12th, 2017, 7:30 p.m., and this is the Committee of the Whole meeting. Mr. Crumstock, we'll let you lead off tonight.
Thank you very much, Mayor and City Council. Before you is the first item. Obviously, we do an annual update from ComEd. As many people around the room know, when we had certain issues with ComEd, specifically throughout the state, ComEd told each municipality they would be doing annual reports. Obviously, people around the room remember Bonita, Cynthia, and now we have Joe Turnage. Joe just started being our external affairs manager right before National Night Out. So he got bombarded with a bunch of different things. But Joe is here actually tonight to do the 2016 annual report. How ComEd did for the city of Rolling Meadows, talks about some of the stuff in 2017. And then obviously there were some changes in ComEd that made this report a little bit longer. We were trying to get him a little here earlier, but staff, we just wanted to make sure that everything was fine. So with that, I do turn it over to Joe, who will be doing his annual report for everybody. And again, this is 2016 report.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Joe Turnage. I'm with ComEd. I do appreciate you guys having me out here, and I look forward to working with you guys in the future. Overall, as far as ComEd goes, we're pretty big on making sure that we provide a positive customer experience, and my job is to continue on with that. Okay, so in getting into the report, this is our City of Rolling Meadows annual report presentation, and what we're gonna talk about today is a couple of things. One of which will be overall reliability, the enhancements that we made in 2016, the ComEd community channels or communication channels, and the ComEd Smart Ready LED program. So if you take a look at the sheet here, this shows the overall reliability for the city of Rolling Meadows. There was a slight increase in 2016. As far as the Katy goes, non-storm and regular storm. But the thing is, we're still looking at a 99.99% overall reliability in 2016. This form here, it's kind of hard to see, but that's okay. This form here, this kind of breaks down what those outages were related to, and two of which that stands out. This is the overhead equipment. We had a increase in the overhead equipment, and we also had an increase in the what is that? I can't see that far. Sorry, everyone. So I'm gonna have to step away from the mic for a moment and take a closer look at these. So I'm going to start over here. Animal-related allergens, we pretty much remain the same. As far as any type of human errors, we don't have that in Rolling Meadows. So meaning that no one's going out playing around with the equipment or touching anything energized. So the intentional, we didn't have much of that. The overhead equipment in 2015, we had a 0.05. We went up to a 0.14. I just jumped to the other ones that are really important. The tree-related issues, we went from a 0.28 down to a 0.07. And later on in the presentation, we're going to talk about what the...
You now have a portable mic, so we can all hear you back at home.
So later on in the presentation, we'll talk about what impacted that, okay? Underground equipment, we went down, and in unknown-related outages, we went down, and in weather-related outages, we went up. So, like I said, we did have certain areas where we increased, and we had certain areas where we decreased. But overall, the reliability for the town is pretty good. Okay? Why don't I just stay right here? So this here is a map of the 23 circuits that serves Rolling Meadows. In case anyone ever wants to take a look at that. I know Barry and his team looks at this frequently because we talked a little bit about being able to get them a different map so that they can clearly see it than I did send one out. It looks similar to this, but it's a little bit more clear than this one is. So here we have our distribution automation. In 2016, we did 3 installs. Just for those of you that don't know, the distribution automation is the equipment that we put on the pole where we could control it through automation. So in other words, whenever there's an outage, we know that there's an outage before the constituents have to call us. And that's a good thing because we can always respond much sooner than what we had before, where we had to wait for someone to call us, tell us that you're out, and then we send someone out. But now, with the distribution automation, what happens is these devices that we put on the system, they could recognize faults. And what they do is they send a test through the line to see if the fault cleared itself. Because a lot of times, tree branches may fall on the line, system recognizes the fault, opens up the switch, everyone's out of power. And in the old days, you'd have to wait for us to come out. Even though the branch has now burned off the line, you have to wait for us to come out, close the switch back in, and then we restore power. But with the distribution automation, that has reduced that significantly to where we can close that switch back, test the lines from our Joliet central office, test the line, close the switch. If it stays, we're good to go. If it doesn't stay and it opens back up, then we know we have to send a crew out there. But at least we have that option to check it, and we can reduce outages when we don't have to send anyone out. Cable replacements. So in 2016, we did some testing. We didn't do cable replacement, but we did do testing. So we did test 2 of the major lines in the area, and we didn't have any issues, so we didn't have to pursue anything there. As far as the overall improvements, we've had a number of different overall improvements. And as you guys can see, there's a pretty long list there of the different things that we did throughout Rolling Meadows for the year. Up top, what we have there in 2016, we did inspecting of several of the overhead lines. In addition to that, we did what we call a thermography. And what a thermography is when we go out and we test the line, we have a device that we would patrol the line, and we would scan the device and look for hot spots. And when we find a hot spot, that pretty much tells us that it's only a matter of time before that section gives out, burns away, and brings the line down. So we did that in 2016 to what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 7 feeders up there. So that's going to be ongoing. So okay, as far as our vegetation management goes, we did some tree trimming in 2016 as well. We did trim 2 feeders, one of which we did a spot trim on, and the other one we did a full trim on. And for those of you that don't know, what we do is we patrol feeders, and we look at the vegetation as we patrol the feeder, and anything that's hanging over our lines or anything that has the potential to come in contact with our lines and create an outage, we trim that away from the power lines. All right, so now here's our E-channels matrix. So got some pretty odd numbers here. Why do I say that? I say that because in 2016, our overall ComEd transactions, and these are online transactions that are going through ComEd.com. Customers who go on to ComEd.com to talk about outages and things like that, or to put in tickets. We had approximately a 3,000% decrease. So we went from 18,000 in 2015 to 15,000 in 2016. Our mobile transactions went from 6,353 to 6,838. So we had an increase in our mobile app transactions. Now, here's one that's kind of odd. We went from 844,000 outage alert transactions to 1,499,000 outage alert transactions. So 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 1,499,0 what that tells me is that folks are using the system for what it's meant to be used for. A lot of folks are using the mobile app to put in their outage notifications instead of calling into the call center, waiting on hold and things like that. Going through the app is a much more expeditious way of getting your tickets entered so that we can respond sooner. And going into our mentions of ComEd, I'm guessing because we went from 200,000 folks mentioning us online to 45,000. Huge decrease. Now, I'm going to guess that that decrease is due to more people using the ComEd app. Because with the app, you can't talk about us online and things like that. So I'm going to allocate that towards that. Our Twitter followers went up from 15,000 to 26,000. And our Facebook fans went from 119,000 to 137,000. And this document here just pretty much tells you all the different things that you can do with our ComEd website and our mobile app. Okay, I'm going to move into the ComEd LED program, and this is the streetlight program. This document here pretty much outlines the type of streetlight replacements that we're doing for Rolling Meadows, and we did have a grand total of 342. And I'm proud to say that as you're sitting here now, we have crews that are out there replacing those lights. So we have a commitment at this time to be done with this as of December 31st. Okay, that will conclude my portion of you guys' meeting today. And once again, I thank you for having me out, and I'll address any questions if you have them at this time.
Would you please come back to the podium?
Yes.
Thank you. Who would like to start off? Ms. Majakis?
Thank you. Just a quick question. The automated devices, so yes. The radius for that, I mean, is the whole city going to be eventually covered then with power outages that you'll get notified right away with those? Or is it just certain miles or?
No, there's no parameters on it. So if you download the app, you'll be able to communicate with our system.
But the
DATs, they're putting more and more into the lines.
Right.
There's not a true plan how many DATs can be on a line for that, but they continue putting more on there, especially in the downtown, which we seem to lose a lot, right by the fire station. Mm-hmm. They put 2 DATs in that area, but they continue to evaluate and then put them where they're needed. Because another part of the DAT is it's always looking for an A-B. So if A is not working correctly, then it's going to go to B. That's why if you look at the last 5 years, you have more flickers or small power outages than the full. And that's what the DAT is really trying to do.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? Mr. Cannon.
Thank you. So you just said that you started to actually change lights out finally this week?
Oh, no, not this week. We started as of November 30th, I believe.
And so you'll be done by the end of the month for sure?
Yes.
I mean, you told us in May they'd be done in May. And then we were told in July they're going to be done in July. We were told they're going to be done in September.
Understood. So we did have some technicalities early on. However, I'm 99.9% sure that we're going to be done. And the reason why I could be that sure is because when I picked up Rolling Meadows, that was one of the major concerns. And when I was notified of we have not begun the street light program, even though we had folks that were working to get it done internally, I did make sure that because of all of the delays that we had throughout the year, that Rolling Meadows was at the top of the list. So I could validate at this time that we will be done.
And Alderman Cannon, I can tell you that on the top agenda item when Public Works Director Fred Vogt and Superintendent Don Wenzel and I meet with Joe or even Cynthia, it's the number one item on the agenda. So exactly. Poor Joe, he's been hit on the head, and he also knows that we're doing our own streetlights too, that we're trying to get everything done, completed in 2017.
Great. Look forward to the conclusion of it. That'd be great.
Excellent. Thank you.
Any other Comments? Questions? Well, we thank you for coming out on this cold, bitter night.
Thank you, guys.
And we're very thankful we have power tonight.
All right.
So we all appreciate that.
And I'll also say before I head out, I went to several night outs throughout the different communities within Illinois, and I have to say Rolling Meadows is the best.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
I'll also leave some cards here with Barry, so if you guys want to pick one up on the way out.
Thank you.
Mr. Crumstock, do you want to do an intro, or do we go straight to Mr. McCall?
Straight to City Attorney Jim McCall, who will talk about the antenna, and it's two different items that we're talking about, antennas.
Mr. McCall, you're on.
Thank you. The one topic on the agenda is labeled antennas. Actually, there's a Part A and a Part B. The one has to do with the ordinance pertaining to the small cell towers. Those are the smaller devices, and the proposed ordinance is an amendment to the city's right-of-way ordinances concerning the installation of telecommunication devices along the right-of-way pertaining to utility poles and the like. The legislation's been pending down in Springfield, and after a series of amendments, and the Illinois Municipal League has done a lot to negotiate with the telecommunications companies to provide municipalities with more control than they had under the original legislation. One of those amendments that the Illinois Municipal League has been able to negotiate into the legislation with the telecommunications companies had to do with the maximum height of a small cell tower, which would typically be placed on a utility pole, a light pole, for example. And so the maximum height of that under the proposed legislation, which is expected to be passed in the spring, would be 45 feet. The proposed ordinance is geared to just kind of have the city get ahead of the game a little bit and have regulations in place so that in the event telecommunication companies come in and want to install those small cell towers, which they have the ability to do, then we have taken advantage of our ability to put in place the authority that the legislation has given us once that's passed. So that's the small cell tower portion of the discussion under antennas, which has nothing to do with Part 2B, which has to do with different antennas. So if you want to do the small cell tower first, then we can talk about the other antennas as well.
Anyone have any questions about the small tower? Because with discussions with Mr. McCall and staff, it seems that we're waiting for Springfield to move ahead on that.
Well, we can always amend our ordinance depending on what the legislation actually shakes out to be, but the legislation's been pending for quite some time. And as I said, thankfully for the Illinois Municipal League and their efforts in negotiating with the different telecommunications companies, and from what I and the city manager are told, the telecommunication companies have said we can live with the 45 feet. And there's other provisions as well, but I think the main thing is the height, because when you look at some of the photos of some of the small cell towers that are constructed and put on utility poles, I mean, they get to be pretty high. And if you can envision that along Kirchhoff and Meadow and Quinton and Algonquin roads, I don't know that you want to look at anything that high. So I think it would be beneficial to the city to go ahead and do this, and we can always amend the ordinance depending on how the legislation actually shakes out. But we're trying to get ahead of the game here.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Mrs. Majakis?
Just comment that I'm in support of this. I think it's important to be proactive on it, and knowing that, it's looking like, would you say, in the fall or in the spring?
That's what's
proposed legislation.
anticipated.
I mean, we know how that all works, but I would rather we be proactive in knowing that if we needed to make adjustments later on, we could. So I think it's a positive.
Thank you, Mr. Majakis. Mr. Cannon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was wondering, if we don't do anything, what will happen?
Well, then we'll have no control over it.
So, I mean, people just can come in and put them up without our permission?
They can come in and they can put them up.
Without any building permit or anything?
Well, they have the right to come in and put them up. They'll have to get permits, but largely beyond that, unless we exercise some control, the legislation that's currently pending, we have absolutely no home rule authority whatsoever.
Okay.
So if, for example, and the height is the big thing, I mean, there are other things as well, but if we limit it to 45 feet, which under the proposed legislation we can do, then we can limit it to 45 feet. If they want to come in and put one at 60 feet, we don't have legislation that opposes that.
But correct me if I'm wrong, I was told by a couple people who are in this industry that they say these are basically just usually for fill-in hotspots. They only really broadcast for, a couple hundred yards at the most?
That's correct.
So, I mean, we're not going to have them all over the place. It's unlikely, what I would say.
Well, and that the opposite could swing true as well. I mean, if they're designed to cover a roadway or a building, but they're limited in the amount of coverage area that they have, from what I understand, and I'm not an engineer, but from what I understand, they're limited in the area. So if they're limited in the area, it may very well be that they need more of them to cover the balance of the areas.
Okay. So if they put one up on top of a pole, they must have some kind of a control device down in the bottom, right?
I'm not familiar with the engineering portion of it, so I don't know.
I'm just wondering, I mean, they can't go on our property without us.
They can go on our property.
And put a box or something down there without our permission?
We can require them to get permits. We can require them to comply with our codes, but we can't prevent them from putting them up.
Okay. And I was curious, I don't know if you know, Mr. McCall, but why did our Plan Commission push this to the side last week and defer for a while? Is there... I didn't see any notes from what had happened there. I was just told verbally that they deferred on it, and I don't know what the reasoning was. Do you have any insight, or does someone else know what happened there?
I think there's an understandable degree of confusion here. That's why I put it into Part 2A and 2B. Right now we're talking about the small cell towers.
Right.
That proposed ordinance only pertains to the city's right-of-way and management of the city's right-of-way. It has nothing to do with areas outside of our right-of-way. In other words, it doesn't have anything to do with, I imagine, the discussion to be at Part 2B relative to telecommunications antennas and monopoles outside of our right-of-way. So they're two different things.
Okay. Thank you.
I apologize for the confusion because the two were together, and I think they're easily confused, but...
Ms. McJenkins.
Thank you. Just making me think here when Cannon was bringing this up. So if we don't put anything into motion here, technically right now someone could come in and do a 60-footer and someone else could do a 45-footer. So we could have this all over the place. And
potentially.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else for Part A?
Which is just the larger...
Part B is, yes.
Just the small. Right now, I'm just talking about the small cell towers, which is the ordinance that pertaining to the small cell towers. To again address Alderman Cannon's point, which was well taken, is an ordinance to amend the zoning code relative to the city's control of its right of way. And that doesn't go to the Planning Commission. Planning and Zoning Commission, as they're now known as, they have jurisdiction to hear evidence and make findings of facts and recommendations relative to amendments to the zoning code. They're two different. The one has nothing to do with the other.
The one footnote that I would actually mention, there are certain municipalities that have already passed ordinances on this issue. Barrington, Bartlett, Deer Park, and Glenview, Evanston are a few that come to mind, but there are certain other municipalities that are in the process right now, because once IML and Northwest Municipal Conference put out the model, that's what people have been looking at and tweaking it a little bit or utilizing it completely. For instance, Elk Grove Village is also having the same discussion that we're having at this point in time. But again, just put out that we're not unique on this. We're not trailblazing at this. We're just following with some other municipalities with everything that's been stated.
Is So, Mr. McCall, any recommendation on the first part?
Well, I think the what's been proposed here relative to the small cell ordinance is we've taken the Illinois Municipal League model ordinance that's been around for almost a year now. I've modified it based on the current pending legislation. We can always amend it, but I think we ought to be proactive, and I think we ought to adopt that ordinance.
Mr. Krumstock, how long before we can get that to the council?
It's almost done.
It's done. I mean, it was up for a first reading at the last meeting, so we can give it a first reading. There's really no huge rush on that. I mean, we can give it a first reading at the next council meeting on the 19th and pass it at the next meeting on January the 9th.
Okay. So that's the direction we're going?
That's what staff was doing before. So,
Do you need direction from council, or we're good?
sounds like it's kind of quiet that it would be back on the 19th as it was, and
Okay.
we'll see what happens.
Thank you. Gee, who's next on the agenda, Jim?
B.
Oh, B.
I really drew the short straw for this one, didn't it? Short straw.
I'm realizing you're an attorney. We're trying to get some humor into this. Okay.
So the next item under item 2 was the last city council meeting. There was an ordinance proposing an amendment to the zoning code concerning commercial antennas and the height of those antennas. Our current code provides for a height of 75 feet. The proposed amendment to the zoning code seeks to reduce that to 45 feet. The 45 feet is a number and a height that I used based on the Illinois State Legislature's current pending legislation relative to the small cell towers, which, again, are completely different towers. But if the legislature determined that 45 feet was a good height, that's where that number came from. So the thinking was that with the proposed telecommunications facility on the leased Park District property at Kimball Hill Park, that they had reduced the height from 110 feet to 75 feet, and the Planning and Zoning Commission heard evidence as to the negative impact on the fair market value of the surrounding single-family homes if that antenna were to be built even at the 115 feet. So the thought was to bring it back to the Planning and Zoning Commission to hear evidence and make findings and recommendations to the council as to whether or not the current permitted height of 75 feet should be reduced to 45 feet. The Planning and Zoning Commission decided to continue that hearing to their next meeting on December the 20th. So as of yet, there are no evidentiary hearings, there's no findings, there's no recommendations from the Planning and Zoning Commission as to whether or not that height should be reduced. I'm not unmindful of the fact that by reducing the height from 75 feet to 45 feet, that coverage will be reduced as well. I mean, as I said it earlier in talking with Alderman Cannon, I'm not an engineer. I don't know what the configurations are. I don't know how any of that works. But in any event, and it depends on whether it comes out of the Planning and Zoning Commission. The Verizon application that's pursuant to the lease with the Park District property was filed with the city back on October the 9th. The city has a 90-day window to either grant or deny that application. So that 90-day window will close on January the 7th of 2018. Under the current schedule with the Planning and Zoning Commission, under the current schedule with the City Council, the earliest that could take place would be January the 9th with council action, which would take us outside that 90-day window which means that permit would, absent anything else, be granted. So they would have that 75-foot telecommunications pole there. The one.
Did you want to bring up the other?
Okay. So in any event, that's where we are with respect to that. So it depends on what the Planning and Zoning Commission comes back with and whatever the council may want to do.
So we can't go forward until the commission has had their hearing and they come back with their recommendation.
That's correct.
Right. Any other thoughts or questions? Ms. Majangas?
You can tell it's a hot topic on mine. So in other words, the 75-footers, done.
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying given the current time frame.
Yes. Yeah. So.
It's not to say the time frame couldn't change. It's given the current time change.
Okay.
Or time frame.
Any other questions? Mr. Cannon.
So, Mr. McCall, I'm a little bit confused. So, the only reason we're changing the code right now is for the one tower?
No.
I mean, so we're going to change the code forever because of the one tower?
No. I envision what's going to happen here is that this may have brought it forward, but the fact of the matter is that the city's current water towers and the sites that are currently located at the fire stations, most recently Fire Station 16, they can't structurally support any more telecommunications devices. And if they can't support those, which historically they have been, I think what's going to happen and what we can foresee is that there will be additional requests for these types of telecommunication structures. And it could very well be additional structures on Park District property, school district property, apartment complexes, condominium complexes, all within or adjacent to the R1 districts or any residential district. Because I don't think there's no other place to put them. So it's not driven by this, although this may have driven the issue. But it's not a one-issue deal.
Okay, because I've had a couple of people that are in this industry actually call me in the last week and a half and offered up. They said that if we go forward with the 45-foot requirement, most people won't build cell towers because they're not high enough to get the job done. And that's why the small towers almost have to be done then, because at 45 feet it doesn't clear most of the trees. So the big carriers won't. So then we'll be anti-business then in our town because we're not going to be allowing people to build them by code unless they come for special use and all that.
Well,
we make it much more difficult. Put it that way.
Unless they come in for variances and to exceed the 45-foot as proposed currently, but not required because we're still at the 75 feet. But it could be taken on a case-by-case basis. I don't disagree with you, and I don't know anything about the engineering of it. But from what little I know, the lower they are, the more you're going to need them. And that's what drives the small cell tower issue that we talked about previously, which has nothing to do with this directly.
Okay, thank you.
Any, Mr. Diastis?
Is 45 foot the height of the tower?
It's the height of the antenna, not necessarily the height of the tower.
So, if there's a 4-story building, they could put a 45-foot antenna on top of that.
Mm-hmm.
So effectively, it would be like 85 feet tall.
Could somebody put like that, right?
Could somebody put this on their own? Could I have one on my rooftop?
You would currently, you could, technically.
Yep.
So anybody could put a 45-foot antenna on top of an existing structure, obviously if it'll hold it.
Sure.
Okay. Just curious.
Mr. Getlow, comment?
And no, to follow up with that, you wouldn't even have to bat an eyelash at putting a small cell at 45 feet on residential property. And then the way that small cells work is that they feed in or off of large base station antennas, the 75 to 120 foot antennas for capacity and bandwidth. So, for example, when the Super Bowl is playing and there's a lot of chatter on wireless, and that wireless chatter gets clogged on a main antenna, then it pushes off into a small cell or vice versa. Or when the Postal Service is delivering packages and you want to use your tracking number on your phone to see where a package is, then it goes ahead and communicates to either a small cell system that's down the street from you and then bounces back to a major antenna to feed back to your cell service. So they work comprehensively together. But when we do go ahead and reduce a standard size, and I've been looking at what's called propagation maps for efficiencies for these heights, and the range is 75 to 120 feet is the average height for maximum efficiency for broadcasting. And to Mr. Cannon's point, when we do go below 75 feet, the efficiency drops to 40% or something of that nature. And I don't think any one of us here in the city are looking to move forward with any actions to only provide a 40% efficacy in anything we would do. So it's good that we get ahead of this, but we concentrate on what's important to make sure that we allow for progress with communications and any actions that we take, regardless of antenna systems or not, but we look to make the most and maximize our efficiency and not necessarily settle for what could be mediocrity. So we should look for heights and ranges that the standards are out there based on the industry, and then use that for ourselves to go forward and plan with the zoning and board appeals.
Thank you. If I could just add one thing, the city manager was trying to indicate to me. I did reach out to a representative of Verizon a week ago, a little over a week now. And with respect to the proposed Park District antenna, and suggested that perhaps they could move that antenna, and I said arbitrarily 600 feet, but if they could move that antenna 600 feet to the east along the shopping center parkway, or the driveway, parking lot, maybe that then would allow them to go back to the 110 feet to give them the coverage that they were originally looking for, and at the same time minimize any adverse effects against or to any of the single family property owners. So I did throw that out there. I haven't heard back. In connection with that, but and I don't know if it would work or not, but it was a proposal that we threw out to try and get everybody where they wanted to be and minimize the adverse effect of the property owners. So if I do hear back, I'll certainly share that with everybody immediately.
Thank you, Mr. McCall. Any other? Mr. Budmet, sir.
Just out of curiosity, when there was some in the beginning discussion that this was R1, so there was some that it couldn't be used for commercial antennas. So is at some point, did we solve the commercial antenna, residential antenna dilemma, and is a commercial antenna, would this be classified as a commercial antenna if it's a 75-foot commercial antenna in an R1 district? Because I'm reading sections of our code and they seem to disagree with each other.
It's considered a commercial antenna, period. I wish our code were clearer. It's not. But the way I read our zoning code, under section 122-122 in connection with the R1 districts, subsection B2 references in section 122-10, which provides for antennas and commercial antennas, and those are given to be permitted uses in the R1 district. And secondly, under the federal regulations, we cannot prohibit, by way of zoning, these antennas in a residential district. So even if one were to take the position that we don't allow commercials and antennas in an R1 district, the federal regulations which preempt ours would mandate that we do, subject to some reasonable regulation. And I can tell you that the city has currently numerous, more than a dozen commercial antennas in the R1 district. So that's my opinion relative to that, although I wish the zoning code were more clear than it is.
Things that I've read say that we have the right to determine what's aesthetically acceptable. Is that something that we can also, I understand that we're obligated by the FCC rules to allow antennas, but San Francisco, other places in California have pushed pretty hard back to get something that they want that complies with the look of what they're trying to get done. And I think that people commented on how this would look in their park. And so it's not that it sounds like an aesthetic question as well as a height question.
There are some aesthetic considerations. Environmental, you can't touch. That's clear. But the aesthetic considerations, there are telecommunication devices that look like pine trees. They look like crosses on the tops of churches. I'm not saying I believe that's the answer to that, but aesthetically there are ways to make these antennas kind of blend into the environment.
And then we're also, as a municipality, allowed to determine what we consider aesthetically acceptable as well?
Well, within reason, and if we can factually back it up with evidence as to why that would be the case and have findings and evidentiary hearings, that's a possibility. But these are all on a case-by-case basis. We can't just say that we don't like this or we don't like that. It can't be arbitrary. You need something to back it up.
Mr. Budman, are you done?
I'm done.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Medekis.
Thank you. So this one particular tower in the park here, it hasn't been so much the issue with the residents that have approached me about the antenna being in the park. There's some miscommunication about it. It's the fact of where they have decided to put it in the park. And again, we had that meeting and talked about, hey, if you would be willing to maybe 600 feet east and work with us on that, it'd be better than out a few people's back door, basically. Mm-hmm. So am I correct in that we are not allowed, because of FCC and all of that we can't say placement of these in the R1 districts because it's not just the cell tower. We're talking fencing, generator. We're talking a large, structure here. It's not just a antenna. Mm-hmm. So if it's placed somewhere in our one district that's kind of tucked back or something, do we have any control of that? Can we have any control of that?
Well, we do have control with respect to setbacks and the like, and I did look at that with respect to this particular proposed antenna on the Park District property. They meet the setback requirements. As to where they decide they want to physically locate it on the site. I don't know what we can really do about that. How do we regulate? It can't be here. We'd rather have it there. How do you put that in an ordinance? It's really pretty difficult to do. So, but going beyond that, I would like to also mention that the proposed ordinance that we've drafted provides that these poles will not be illuminated, mm-hmm. because I think that's reasonably another adverse impact on these surrounding single-family homes. And not to sound unpatriotic, but the Park District wants a flag on it. Yeah. And I've got nothing against flags. Obviously, I don't think nobody in this room does. But if you're going to put a flag there, then it's got to be lit at night, unless somebody's going to take it down. And Verizon's not going to take it down. If the park district's going to take it down, but so it has to be illuminated. So that's just a further negative impact, I think, on these single-family homes. So that's why the pending ordinance that we have drafted provides they will not be illuminated, with the thought being if it's not going to be illuminated, you won't have the flag on there. And again, it's not that anybody has anything against flags. It's just creates an adverse effect on the single-family homes, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Matakis, anything else?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Any other comments?
In the audience, what is it?
Yeah, he's got the list.
That's next. I just wanted to see anyone else. The council meeting is now open to members of the audience for 20 minutes to address the city council on matters that are not on the agenda, that are on the agenda only.
We'll be here all night.
I was so thrilled by what you had to say, Jim, that I just lost it.
That makes one of us.
Yeah, we ask the persons wishing to address the city council keep their comments to 5 minutes in length. Comments must be addressed to the council as a whole through the mayor, and profanity may not be used in any form. Mr. Hollish, you are first one up tonight.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Yeah, thanks. I understand. I'm only going to address one issue that's on the agenda tonight. I kind of got misled. But anyway, the antenna, I've been following this really closely since it got proposed back in the city council for the 110-foot tower, and I don't want to say tower, pole, unless you go by the glossary on the state referendum, State Bill 1451, which is quite elaborate, as our attorney said. It guidelines what small cells are supposed to be, which is only on the right-of-way, and right-of-way antennas are only good for 150 to 500 feet, and I know that because I was on a design team in Motorola when these first came out, and they're made to fill streets. You put them on light poles all the way down the street, and it fills a gap. It's not made to provide any kind of coverage like a pole, tower, or anything else can do. The best optimization you can get, as our one alderman said, is you put up a tower, a pole, anything like that. When Verizon came in with 110 feet, I understand that it may think it's an eyesore right away, but if you look on Kimball Hills, there's a lot more eyesores in that park, which are closer to residents than this pole would have been. This pole would have been 400 feet away from the nearest resident, which is way within the guidelines developed by the FCC and the FAA. They put in certain things that say you can't put a tower up within a certain limitation in R1 to a residence. This pole was that. So that kind of shoots down this. There was also, in the amendment that you proposed in the city council, that said there was information from realtors that said this is detrimental to property value. I have never found anything in the 1,000 cell sites that I've installed across the country that has been detrimental to public values. There's been different concerns with safety and health issues, but we've addressed those. We've also come up with flashing lights on towers. Again, the FCC and the FAA require anything under 500 feet has to not have lights. Anything above that, you have to put lights in because of aircraft. This particular pole is nowhere near an air traffic approach or anything like that, so it has no regards to light, so you don't need that. Basically, if you drop it down to 75 feet, Verizon can get the coverage they want. Certain times of the year will be worse. When you put trees and leaves on it, it gets worse. But most of the time, it'll meet their coverage. If you put it 600 feet east, you're still going to be resolving the same thing. Your line of sight is the way it is. And when you work on propagation within a city, you look at the propagation map. They have engineering specifications that do that. And you see what your handoffs are to your nearest cell site, etc. 600 feet really doesn't matter a whole lot. If you go to 600 feet and you want to put it up, let them put it back to 110 feet. It's not an eyesore. It's just a pole. That's all it is. And that's the clearest thing. If you want to look at ugly towers, go to look at the one that's over by the fire station. It's under 50 feet, but it's ugly. It's got antennas sticking off the end of it, and it looks ugly from the word go. You'll go down by the AT&T tower, by Cook County's tower, what's painted red and white. That's ugly. That's well over 100 feet. So this pole is not an eyesore. It's on the corner of property that is out of the way of anybody else. The only people that might really complain would be the bank, because they're the closest to it. Anybody else is outside the distance required by law to have a pole up. The other thing I want to say is this is good free income for the Park District. Anybody that wants to complain and say, don't put this pole up, don't do this, fine. Give the Park District $30,000 that they would get every year for the next 10 years from this venture. You don't want to come up with $30,000? Let Verizon put their pole up, and the Park District gets free income for 10 years. That's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Roberts, you now have the floor for up to 5 minutes.
I don't really need my notes because most of this has gone out the window anyway, but I'm not sure where he got a lot of his facts from. It's $24,000 a year, not $30,000. We were sent a letter, registered letter, because we were within 250 feet of the pole, not 400. So I'm not sure, unless he's out there, I'm not sure if you know how to read a tape measure, if you're out there staking it off, or exactly how that all came about. But the other issue about this whole thing is you go through Arlington Heights, Palatine, they don't have this stuff in their parks. They don't have this stuff downtown. Why do we have to? Why are we in the cell business? Why is it our responsibility to provide cell service? That's what I want to know. You know, it makes no sense to me. You know, I think the idea behind getting it down to 45 is great because of the reason that a cell company is not going to want to put it on at 45 feet. Yes, on top of a 4-story building, they can do that, but that would be fine. I don't have a problem with that. It's where number one, this one is located, and the other ugly towers in the park that he's talking about are light poles for the baseball field and everything else that have been there for 40 years. You know, we're not adding something else to it's I don't know. But anyway, that's kind of where I'm at with this whole thing. I mean, you guys have listened to me talk about this for 4 months. One of the reasons the variance got shot down from 110 to 75 is because the zoning board looked at it and said, well, the coverage at 110 isn't very large. And so they're like, well, we don't, you know, what's the point? Why do you want the 110? And because the coverage is very small that they're going to provide at 110. It's going to get smaller at 75. It's not going up. So, again, what is the reason for this thing? You know, I don't understand it. I'm having a tough time swallowing this. Now I've been thrown the curveball that the 75 is going to go up anyway because we can't meet the
Mr.
dates.
Roberts, excuse me, just pull the mic over. Thank you.
I did this last time, too, so.
It's okay.
There aren't that many people. I thought they could all hear me anyway. But, now I forgot what I was. Thanks. Now I forgot what I was going to talk about.
You're still on 10.
Well, the reduced coverage from the 110 down to the 75. That's one of the zoning. You can read it in the thing because the coverage wasn't there at the 110. That they felt there was no benefit to doing that. But nobody can give us the coverage at 75. We've asked for it repeatedly, from the cell companies to the Park District. Nobody will pass it out as to what it's going to be. I'm not sure what that tells us, but probably it's not going to be very big, even if, you know, with the trees and all the other stuff and this and that. That we don't want these things cropping up in the parks. You know, we have a very unique park that runs from one end to the other. It's not like Arlington Heights and Palatine where they have these little separate parks. You can go all the way from one end of town to the other. We do not want these things popping up, even at 45 feet popping up. But we got to get a handle on this. You got to be proactive about it. Don't wait for Springfield, for God's sakes, because we all know what's going on down there. Just somehow think about the residents. Think about, one, are we want to be in the cell business? We shouldn't be. It's not our responsibility to do this. It's up to the cell people and everything else to find spots for these things. There's spots for them. Rolling Meadows is not We don't have all this large commercial land. We don't have places to put all these things. We got to reduce the size so nobody wants to come in and do this. That's just a fact. Thank you.
Well, thank you for taking time to speak with us.
Mr. Mayor,
Well,
I got one thing to add.
You know.
Well, I had.
You had your opportunity.
No, you had a comment that I used your GIS information to plot the land.
Sir, thank you.
And, okay, one information? If you want to look at a small cell site.
Please sit down, please.
Okay, I'm just telling you where you can see a small cell site.
Thank you. You had your opportunity. Please sit down. Thank you very much.
My opportunity when you have a posted information.
Robin Grunfeld, thank you.
Well, here I am again. I do love the 45. I can't tell you how happy that makes me. There is a code that some gentleman over here met. I'm short.
I know.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Isn't that a Verizon one? Okay. There is a code that cell towers and things cannot be put up if it's going to be injurious to property value or improvements to the vicinity. I have given twice numerous articles that it can be injurious to my property value. It's also not, a cell tower in the park is not an enhancement. That also would be injurious to the park. Technology is growing. Yes, we do need cell towers. But our parkland is not going to magically grow land. And with this cell tower, not a flagpole, not an antenna, tower, I read the contract between Park District and Verizon. 2,331 square feet is going to be taken from the park. That's a lot. I live in a basic 3-bedroom home. And my house, it would be 2.5 of my houses taken away from the park. These are not national parks, but there are parks. We need to protect the parks. We need to protect residential areas. When I bought this house, I could see the park, and I love it. With the fencing going up, I'm not going to see the pond anymore. And I paid a little extra money for this prime location, and I wanted to keep that view that I've paid for. There are many places to put towers. Put them on top of buildings, put them in industrial areas, put them by the fire stations. That doesn't bother me. That's not close to residential. So I'm asking you tonight to hear what we're saying. And not only hear what we're saying, but listen to what we're saying. All the people who have signed the petitions, all the people that may have called you or maybe stopped you, listen, this is not a place for a cell tower. I'm losing faith, and I really want to believe that residents' voices do matter. And I hope they do. Thank you.
And thank you for your comments. That closes this end of the meeting. Do we have a motion to adjourn? All second? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? We're done.